Have you ever heard ghosts? Have you ever seen a spirit? Have you ever been touched in the middle of the night when you're all alone? Have you ever heard voices when you know there's no one there? Welcome to the Halloween special of Reality Changer Radio. What you are about to hear are true ghost stories. They actually happened, and they happened to me. I hope you enjoy. I was working the late shift at the silkscreen factory. The year 1974. I was 17, and I ran a silkscreen press. We made vinyl book covers. I worked the night shift because it was easier with more pay, and since I was the only one paying the bills, it seemed reasonable. The plant was a good 45-minute walk away. I didn't have a car, so I didn't have a choice. I lived near the woods, so I had to walk through the woods by the lake and across the bridge to go to the shopping center, which was next to the industrial park. It was a long walk, but I had fun at the job. One night, I left work, and it was about 12:30 at night. As I said, it usually took about 45 minutes to get home, wandering through the woods in the middle of the night, with only the moonlight to guide my path, but I had walked it so many times I could probably do it blindfolded. Up the hill, through the leaves, past the trees, finally I make my way to the streets and find my house. I go inside, and it's about 1:20 in the morning. As usual, I decide to make myself a cup of coffee and smoke a cigarette while I watch the late night news. Sitting there, I turn on a show and I relax, glad that work is over for the day, glad that I can just relax, take it easy. The house that we lived in were made-over campgrounds from the 1950s. Because it was a lake, it was a vacation spot before they made it into homes. They didn't spend a lot of money. In fact, the place we had wasn't even finished in the basement. At that point in time, those cabins had floor furnaces, a giant grate in the middle of the floor, and a furnace bolted to it underneath, and it hung down into an unfinished basement. The basement you entered by two cyclone doors. Those of you that are not familiar with those are the old style 1940s, 1950s basement doors. Each door weighs about 60 pounds. They're made out of solid steel. And at this point in time, they were totally rusted. If you even touched one of the doors, the entire neighborhood knew someone was going in their basement. They creaked, and they groaned, and they screamed every time you opened them and every time you closed them. There was one grate in the living room, and there was one grate in the hallway, in place of the floor, next to the bedroom and the bathroom. That one had a furnace. The grate in the living room did not. You could lean over, look down the grate, and stare into the empty, unfinished basement, right to the unfinished floor, the dirt and the gravel. The chair I was sitting in was about 4 feet away from the grate, watching an old rickety TV, black and white, aluminum foil on the antenna, and a stick nearby to bang it when it didn't work right. Ah, the good old days. I sat there, I took a drag of my cigarette, kind of stared out the window, when all of a sudden a sound came out of the grate from the basement that would lift me off the chair about an inch, throw my coffee onto the floor, and make me drop my cigarette. The sound was that of a werewolf. Now, I know that sounds bizarre, but imagine what a werewolf would sound like if it was howling at full moon. And imagine if he was 4 feet away from you, right under the floor. That's how loud it was. The sound lasted for about 5 seconds. I've thought about this over the years and counted 5 seconds, and yes, the sound lasted for about 5 seconds. And for 5 seconds, my life was turned upside down. Now, one of the scariest things was during those 5 seconds, it dawned on me that whatever was making that sound had to have been in the basement before I came home, because I had been home for over an hour and I had not heard any creaking cellar doors that would allude to the fact that someone was sneaking into the basement to pull a trick on me. Shaking, sweating, and frightened, the noise stopped. I dared myself to peer down into the basement, but I didn't have the courage. Instead, it dawned on me that something has to be done. I cannot call the cops. What can I tell them? That there's a noise in my basement? They'll laugh at me. This is the 70s. These are old school cops. If I tell them that I see somebody killing somebody, they'll come out. If I tell them I hear a howling in my basement, they'll tell me to let the dog out. No, I had to deal with this on my own. But how? How in the world am I going to deal with something that's in my basement that howls as loud as a werewolf would howl? And I have no idea what it looks like or what it's capable of. Now, mind you, my mother, who had, in her infinite wisdom, decided to get very, very drunk that night, was passed out on the couch. She heard nothing. Didn't even wake up. I, on the other hand, decided that, well, if I'm going to have to do this, then two things are going to happen. Number one, I'm going to have a flashlight. Why? There's no light in the basement. It's pitch black. I can't see anything, even if I wanted to. Number two, I had better have some kind of a weapon. So I scoured the kitchen for a giant steak knife, and I found a butcher knife that we use to cut the turkey at Thanksgiving. I thought, yeah, this is the biggest one I got. This is going to have to do. I didn't have a gun, and I really wasn't even sure if that would work. So here I go, through the kitchen, down the hallway, past the grate that actually has a furnace, and outside to the back. I look, and I see that both doors of the cellar are closed tight. This is going to be fun. Now, I get the flashlight, and I start to pull on one of the doors. I get it about 4 inches open, and it starts to creak really loud. And I thought, well, this is great. Not only do the neighbors know that I'm going down into my basement, but whatever's in the basement also knows I'm going down there. Fabulous. I won't be able to surprise it. It wasn't that very big of a basement anyways. So I open up the door, and I wait for something to jump out at me. My heart's in my throat. I can't think straight. I'm still sweating. Nothing comes out. I shine my light down the stairs, ready to run from anything that might be leaping up those stairs at me, and I don't see anything. I gingerly make my way down the steps, knife in hand, ready to do battle with whatever monster may be laying in wait for me. And of course, the cobwebs, which I've never, ever wiped away, still have spiders in them, and they're catching in my hair, and that's freaking me out, as it would anybody. I get to the bottom of the stairs, and I shine my light around, just waiting, and I don't see anything. Now the real panic sets in, because straight ahead of me is a dirt wall with a crawl space. It's the only thing I can't see with my flashlight. Now imagine, if you would, it's a crawl space that's as tall as your head. And what I mean by that is you don't see the opening unless you get next to it, and the opening is right at your chin. So if you were to go next to it and stare into it and something was there, it could easily swipe your head off. Well, it's the only place I haven't looked. And I'm listening and listening. I don't hear any breathing. I don't hear any sounds. I don't have much of a choice here. I know whatever's in the basement did not leave the basement by the stairs and the grounding doors. So now I have to do what I have to do. And I need to tell you that I had to change my underwear that night. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I'm sure everybody would. Step by step, I make it closer and closer to the crawl space. I shine my light. I lean, I look, I do everything I can to see everything in the crawl space without having to get too close to it, but it's impossible because of the shadows. So, I steel myself getting ready for whatever might happen, and I get ready to stab whatever's going to come out of there. At least I'm going to get a piece of it if it takes me. That's my mentality at the time. I get closer and closer, and I stop and I wait and I listen for breathing, I listen for movement, I listen for anything that'll give me a sign that I don't need to shine the light on something. I know it's in there and I'm getting the hell out of there. But I don't hear anything. I don't smell anything. So I have no choice but to get closer and closer. As I do, I get more scared. I get up next to the crawl space, and I deliberately reach my arm around and shine the light in there to disturb whatever might be in there as a final effort to make something move so that I can justify running away without actually having to face it. It doesn't work. Quickly, I turn and leap into the open and shine my light on the crawl space that I can't see. There is nothing there. I stand there for a moment, shaking, quivering, sweating, my heart racing, my adrenaline pumping, and I don't know what to think. There's nothing there. There is absolutely nothing there. Yet I know what I heard, and I know what brought me down the stairs at almost 2 in the morning while I was relaxing in my chair. I know what I heard. I asked the neighbors if they heard anything that night. Nobody heard anything. Of course, my mother never woke up because she was fast drunk asleep. Told me I was crazy. I told other people too, and they asked me what I was smoking. Well, it was the 70s, but that night, the only thing I was smoking was a cigarette, and the only thing I was drinking was coffee. Needless to say, I didn't sleep easy that night, and the damnedest thing is, it never happened again. Just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, is a little town called Jenkintown. There's a place called Ink and Copy that's no longer there. It's a print shop that I worked at for 8 years. The building is a 3-story Victorian home built in the 1800s and used for many, many things over the years. Medical offices, official offices, but for the last 20 years had been used as a print shop. The bottom floor was copy machines and store where you could buy pens and pencils and paper and get copies. The second floor was where we did posters and mounted them, and my office was there, and there was a bathroom there and the refrigerator. And the third floor was where we made all our stamps and held a whole bunch of storage. My office was right off of the stairs. You walk up to the stairs and you could just walk right into my office. There was a coffee machine there. At my desk, I could turn to my right and I could see the door opening, and I could look at the stairs, and I always knew if someone was coming up the stairs. As I walked out of my office to go down the stairs, just to my right was another room where we mounted the posters. If anybody was in there, I could see them out of my peripheral vision as I'm walking by. For a few years, we had experiences that were beyond belief, and that I found out later the owner already knew about because she refused to talk to me about it. I discovered on my own what was going on, and this story seems bizarre, but it actually did happen. Most of the things that happened were in your face. I'm standing there in my office on the second floor, and directly below me is the counter where the cash register is. However, under my feet, I feel the pounding and the sound as if someone has a giant railroad tie and is slamming the bottom of the floor, trying to burst through into my office. I can actually feel the vibration, and several times I went downstairs just to verify that no one was doing anything and to verify the exact location of that spot versus what was down below me on the first floor. Everyone down there assured me they heard nothing. I could tell from looking at it that there was no connection physically to my floor and what was going on the first floor. So I put up with it. I would routinely come into my office on the week after the weekends, and the power would be off. I haven't turned the power switches on yet, but the power on the computers is on. The computers are on. The power switches are off. I don't know how. I'm just telling you what I found. Many, many times I would find things on the desktop, things that I hadn't put there. Upon investigation with the owners who would come in on the weekend, they didn't do it. When I got the info on the folders or the files that I would find on the desktop, they were 10 to 15 years old, and when I went and looked back through the files, I could find nothing that would match those digital files that were created long before those computers were made. Things would happen. Things would happen in the basement. I would mention stories to the guy because the basement is where we had the printing presses. And he would just give me a scared look and turn away and go back to printing. I knew something was going on. Stuff would move. You could hear sounds. You'd be at the bottom of the stairs as you walk in, going upstairs, and you're the only one there. And you can hear people talking on the next set of stairs going up to the third floor. A man and a woman, distinctly talking. You can't make out what they're saying, but you are the only one there other than somebody else on the first floor who's making copies. There was a door that led from the bottom of the stairs to the first floor. You would go down the stairs, open this door, and there's a copier there, and you'd turn right, and you go down the hallway into the main store where the counter was and the front door. One day, this door opened all by itself as we were standing there, me and another guy. And as it did, a gigantic burst of cold air came through. It seemed to go right through me and right into the copier standing behind me. Now, I didn't say anything at that moment, but the door stayed open. And as I walked through, the door stayed open and then slowly closed behind me. Without ever touching it, I had to wonder how that happened. You see, the door was on one of those hinges that automatically closes so that it doesn't stay open. They did that deliberately to keep the door closed because they didn't want people just walking up the stairs. So for the door to stay open by itself was somewhat miraculous. When I came back and asked the guy standing there if he had felt anything, he said to me, "You mean that giant cold wind that seemed to come right through the copiers?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Wow, I didn't know what to make of that." And I said, "Okay." So I thought, well, there we go again, stuff going on. Things like this happened all the time. What really did it for me was I was sitting at work. I was sitting at my desk, and many times I would walk through, and there was somebody standing there in the mounting room. It was obvious. I was downstairs one time, and I was going to go upstairs, and I opened up that door that you have to open up. And the owner's on the other side. She had just come downstairs. When she saw me, her face turned white as a sheet. She said, "How did you get down here so fast?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You were just in your office." And I told her, "No, I've been down here for half an hour talking to Mike." And her eyes went wide, and she shook her head, and she just pushed past me and said, "I don't want to talk about it." A few days later, I'm sitting at my desk, and on my left-hand side is an old radiator with a radiator cover and an old-time radio. And I had the habit of setting customer discs on that. Just take the disc out, put the CD jewel case on top. That was a habit of mine. Now the CD jewel case is sticking out past the corner of the radio, sitting on top of it. And imagine the sound if you were to take your hand and as quick as you could, as hard as you could, bring it up and slap the bottom of that jewel case. Imagine that sound. Well, I'm sitting there one day and I hear that sound, and I glance over to see the jewel case doing somersaults in the air and landing about 2.5 feet away from where it was sitting, down at the bottom of my feet. I thought, well, there's some more stuff. These are just minor examples. More can be said in my book. There's a giant chapter that I may dedicate to this place because a million things happened. So I decided to take some pictures because they always talk about orbs. I came in with my camera and I started taking pictures. What I found was incredible. I took a picture of the mounting room, which is where we always saw people, and didn't see people. On the picture, it appeared as if a gigantic multicolor orb was in the room. I took the picture from my office. This orb was behind the doorway in the mounting room, and you could see half of it hanging out past the top of the doorway. So it was clearly, whatever it was inside the room, and it was huge. That night, after taking the pictures, I had a dream. I had a dream of an old man in suspenders, an old-style long john shirt, gray hair and a beard, and his name was Henry. And Henry came to me in that dream, and he said that that place was once his. And in the dream, we went back to the place, and he showed me around. He gave me the tour as if he was the owner. He showed me where this room was. He said what he did in that room, and apparently my office had been his favorite room. Now, my office was the room where there was all the activity. Well, I should say most of the activity. The activity and the voices and everything were all over the place. So I asked him, I said, "What's going on?" He said to me, he looked me straight in the eye in the dream, and he said, "You know, it's my house, everybody uses it, and nobody even says good morning. And that really pisses me off." And I said, "Really?" He goes, "You know, I just want some respect. It's my damn house." And then the dream kind of ended. Well, the next morning I decided, you know what? Since I have so much experience with this stuff, maybe it wasn't just a dream. I go in that morning, And as I'm going up the stairs to my office, I go, "Good morning, Henry." And as I do, I get to the top of the stairs, and you could feel all this cold energy just whoosh right onto me, as if fans were blowing on me. And once again, I say, "Good morning, Henry. I hope you have a wonderful day." From that moment on to the next 4 years that I worked there, I never had an incident. In fact, when I told the guy in the basement who ran the presses, he came up to me and he said, "What was that guy's name, Henry?" He goes, "Good morning, Henry." And every morning that he did that, he never had an issue. Now, I don't know about the others. They looked at me in amazement when I said it. But I never heard anything from them, and I kind of think that they were saying good morning to Henry also. All the guy wanted was some respect from the people that were using his house while he was still living in it. Well, that's it for our show today, folks. I hope you enjoyed the Halloween special. I only had a couple of stories to give you, but they're teasers, and I try to pull out a couple of really good ones. They're all true. They actually did happen, and they happened just the way I said it. So join me next week, won't you? As we go back to our normal programming of Reality Changer Radio, and give you more hints, tips, advice, and insights on manifesting the law of attraction and changing your reality. Until next time.